Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon. We have some news as far as Matt Gaetz is concerned. As you all know, Matt Gaetz has resigned from the 118th Congress. That's the Congress that we're in right now. And he did that in anticipation of the House Ethics Report, which was going to be highly damaging. That was the reporting that was coming out about what that report contained. We now have news that Matt Gaetz will also not serve in the 119th Congress. So I'm going to switch over the screen here so that you can hear the announcement from him. And this was, of course, made to Charlie Kirk.
I'm still going to be in the fight, but it's going to be from a new perch. I do not intend to join the 119th Congress. There are a number of fantastic Floridians who've stepped up to run for my seat, people who have inspired with their heroism, with their public service. And I'm actually excited to see Northwest Florida go to new heights and have great representation. Charlie, I've been in an elected office for 14 years. I first got elected to the state house when I was 26 years old, and I'm 42 now. And I've got some other goals in life that I'm eager to pursue with my wife and my family. And so I'm going to be fighting for President Trump. I'm going to be doing whatever he asks of me, as I always have. But I think that 8 years is probably enough time in the United States Congress. I'm still going to be in the fight, but it's going to be from a new person.
So 8 years is enough time in the United States Congress, which I'm sure has nothing to do with the fact that within those 8 years, that if he were to go longer than 8 years, that would probably include the release of a House Ethics Report that may or may not show evidence of sex trafficking of a minor. So it's funny how he frames this as if he's just gotten his fill of serving in the House, when in reality, of course, he wanted to serve in the House more than that. He just knows that if he were to stay in the House, then the House Ethics Committee would have jurisdiction over him, and they would release this report outlining all of his wrongdoing. And by the way, they still may do that. I spoke with Senator Klobuchar yesterday about whether or not there's precedent for them to release the report, even if he's not in Congress. And she said there is, of course, precedent for the House Ethics Committee, that it's happened numerous times now. So I do anticipate that we will see that report released. I know there's still pressure on the Ethics Committee to release that report. And remember, the fact that Matt Gaetz is not going to be a part of the 119th Congress, which is this Congress that's set to be sworn in on January 3rd, doesn't mean that he's still not running for office. We may very well see Matt Gaetz run for the governor of Florida, for example. I would presume that that's what we're going to see at some point. I don't know if I actually don't know if Ron DeSantis is term limited. Let's see if we have any information on that. Okay, so he is term limited. So he'll leave office in January of 2027. So Matt Gaetz may very well be setting up his run for the governor of Florida. I anticipate that if I had to put money on it, which, that and $10 will get you a foot long at Subway, but if I had to put money on it, I would presume that we will see another run for office, probably just in Florida alone, in Matt Gaetz's future. So there is a vested interest in making sure that people know who they'll be voting for. And if there's an ethics committee report out there that shows, for example, some evidence of sex trafficking of a minor, that's probably something that voters are entitled to see. And remember, this House Ethics Committee report is a taxpayer-funded report. It is ours to know. And so this notion that we fund this report based on our tax dollars for someone who is serving in the Congress to represent us, and we somehow shouldn't have any access to it, defies logic here. I think I figured out how to fix this. Okay, we're all good. By the way, I know yesterday I did a thumbs up, and every time I do a thumbs up, it freezes this screen, and now I figured out how to fix it, so I won't have to end these live streams now just because I get caught in some awkward position. Thank you, by the way, for people who are just tuning in. I'm seeing that there's a lot of new people joining, so I appreciate you watching these live streams. Appreciate you tuning in and staying involved in this fight. This is the most important thing, I think, right now is that people do not check out. And I know it's especially difficult in a situation where, you know, everybody watching this is probably to some degree disheartened and discouraged by what we're seeing. But a big part of it, look, in 2016, everybody felt in large part the way that they feel now. Within 2 years, Democrats would win the House by the biggest margin in modern American history. And within 2 years after that, they would keep the House, win the Senate, win the White House, as well as state legislatures, break up trifectas for Republicans, and start to claw back some of the massive wins that Republicans made in 2010 in state legislative seats across the country. So you know, I beg of people, as difficult as it may be, take the time you need, but stay in this fight more broadly. I'm being asked, like, what about Matt Gaetz running for the Senate for Rubio? That is a good suggestion because Rubio is vacating his seat, but I still think the same logic applies. I think, look, if he is in Congress, I feel like in either House of Congress, I feel like Matt Gaetz is still subject to the jurisdiction of the House Ethics Committee. And while they may have possibly delayed, but maybe they'll be successful at just burying this report, although I hope that's not the case. But if he comes back into Congress, either as a senator or a lawmaker, then I think that once again, the heat will be on the House Ethics Committee to release the report about him. So I presume that he wouldn't be running for any elected office in the federal government. I presume that if he were to run, it would probably be as the governor of Florida in 2026. Remember, this is just 2 years from now. So it actually does work out in the sense that it gives him enough time to maybe take 5 minutes off, get some heat off of him for the fact that this guy who is running as a representative in a party whose identity is predicated on protecting kids may very well be a child sex trafficker. So maybe want to lay low for 5 minutes, although this is Matt Gaetz we're talking about, so I don't anticipate that he will. I don't know that there's a whole lot of discretion happening as far as Gaetz is concerned, but this would give him some time to actually stand up a gubernatorial campaign and run for governor of Florida in 2026. Obviously, he hasn't announced anything, and if he does, he's definitely not doing it right now. So I do presume that if we see something like that, it'll probably be within the next 6 months, if I had to guess. But it's a good call that there is the prospect of Matt Gaetz being able to run for the U.S. Senate for Marco Rubio's seat. That seat will be vacated, and a special election will be called. And I believe that we have a few other seats in the House because Trump picked a handful of lawmakers from the House in terms of filling up his cabinet. With that said, let's take this opportunity right now to answer some questions while we have the opportunity. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. By the way, for those who are just joining right now, the news is that Matt Gaetz will not be running serving in the 119th Congress. So we know that he resigned from the 118th Congress, which is the Congress we're in right now. He won't be serving in the next Congress either. Okay, do I think that all of Trump's cabinet picks will make it all 4 years of his term? This is a good question because Trump's whole career in federal office has been marred by the fact that he can't keep anybody in his cabinet. He can't keep anybody in the jobs that they're appointed to fill. But I do think that this one's different because I feel like he's learned from the mistakes of the past. A lot of the people who were put into the roles that they served in before were not loyalists because he didn't know that's what he needed. And so, like, you have somebody like Rex Tillerson, Rance Priebus, H.R. McMaster. These were people who served for him, and they were conservative hardliners and whatnot, but they weren't Trump loyalists. And when it came time for Trump to try and enact his agenda, which was largely unconstitutional and extrajudicial, he faced pushback by these people who, again, were not there to serve him, but were, even if I don't agree with a single thing they do, we're still showed adherence to the Constitution and not just Trump. But this time, he's fixed a lot of that problem. And so the people who are there are loyal to him before anything else. And you look at somebody like J.D. Vance. The reason that J.D. Vance is Donald Trump's running mate is expressly because he was willing to do what Mike Pence wouldn't on January 6th. He came out and said he would have prevented certification of the election. That is why he's there. That was the litmus test for J.D. Vance, and it will remain the litmus test for any other person who is involved in Donald Trump's cabinet, his administration. And so I think that there is a higher likelihood that we will see some of these people make it, or if not most of these people make it the entirety of the 4 years, because, again, the reason they're there is because they surpassed whatever threshold Donald Trump put in front of them, which was, of course, to show loyalty to him. That's why they're there. That's their first, second, and third priority. Does this not make you fearful of them trying to do a third term? Okay, so here's the deal on the third term, because Trump has teased it. The fact is we have the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution. That prevents somebody from running for a third term. Am I naive enough to think that Donald Trump, who already tried to subvert the Constitution once and undermine the peaceful transfer of power, is not capable or willing to try and subvert it again? No. But I also don't want to look. There's going to be a lot to be concerned about over the next 4 years. There's a lot of dangerous activity that's going to be happening over the next 4 years. What I don't want to do is invent something that hasn't happened yet, and fall into the trap of. Let me see how I want to put this. Invent something that hasn't happened yet and fall into the trap of fear-mongering or expressing concern over that, when there's going to be real stuff that's going to happen that we should focus our energy on. The fact is, like, could Trump try to stay for a third term? Metaphysically, anything is possible, right? But we have a system of checks and balances in place. We have a Constitution in place. We have a Supreme Court that is supposed to be deferential to the Constitution. Whether they will be remains to be seen. But until we get to a point at which the Supreme Court or Republican lawmakers or Republican senators decide that the Constitution doesn't matter, which will effectively mean that, like, our system of governance has fallen by the wayside. Like, that's DEFCON 5 unto itself. I think we operate within the confines of where we are right now, and we don't. There's going to be real things that we have to focus on that are happening, and I think it's a better use of our time right now to focus on what we can control and what's happening than to also fall into the trap of worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, but could certainly happen, but that hasn't happened yet, and whose likelihood is lower than it is likelier. If all of that makes sense. All right, this is a good point too. I'm seeing in the chat. Like, if everything is a fire, nothing is a fire, and so I don't want to. I think we have to be clear-eyed. I think we have to be focused on what's right in front of us and pick our battles smartly. And right now, like, it doesn't help anybody to just run around with their hair on fire and over the prospect of a third term, for example, because we have no indication that that's happening. And so I think it's better for the movement on the left if we focus our energy on what we know is right in front of us. And so and be smart and strategic about what we focus our energy on. There are going to be days where 10 different things happen and all of them feel like an emergency, but I do think it's important that we stay organized and we stay focused so that we're not, looking in 10 different directions and then all of a sudden it feels like nothing is sticking, because that's how it works, right? That's the Steve Bannon model of flooding the zone with shit. And then you have Democrats, pointing at healthcare and abortion and gun safety and climate and vaccines and this and that, and everybody's in all different directions. We're all scattered and there's no united front, and we're not talking about anything, and of course nothing sticks because we can't focus on one thing. And so I do think it's incumbent on us as we move forward to make sure that we pick our battles smartly. And sometimes bad things are going to happen that we can't focus on because we're focusing our energy on something that is more important in the hierarchy. Like even with Trump's cabinet, I think the same thing applied. Is Pete Hegseth unto himself the least qualified nominee that we've seen for a cabinet? Probably. But the fact is that when the hierarchy becomes, okay, we have Pete Hegseth and then somebody like Matt Gaetz as attorney general, I do think it's smart to focus our energy on someone like Matt Gaetz. And certain people will fall through the cracks. And I do think that, Linda McMahon, for example, like she'll get in, she'll be confirmed. But if it means that that happens, and that we can focus our energy on people like Matt Gaetz, who now we know won't get in, that I think is what's more important. And we've already shown that outside pressure can have an influence here. I mean, Democrats are in the minority. Democrats don't even have a majority on the House Ethics Committee where that report was going to be released. And yet still, from the pressure on the outside against Matt Gaetz, that was able to have enough of an impact that he's not going to be the next Attorney General of the United States. That's important to know for us, that we still have power even from the minority, that we can still have an influence even from the minority, and that if we focus our energy in specific places where it needs to be, then it can still be impactful. Can Democrats gain back some ground in the special elections to replace Trump's cabinet nominees? Yeah, of course. I mean, inherently, we'll have the opportunity to gain back some ground. I think there are 3 House seats, if I'm not mistaken. We'll have Matt Gaetz' seat, which we're not going to win, but Elise Stefanik's seat is, I believe, New York's 21st congressional district, if I'm not mistaken. That is a red seat, but it's possible it could flip. In any case, yeah, there is the possibility that Democrats could gain ground just by virtue of these seats, being vacated. Remember, we don't always know what's going to happen. Republicans ran Roy Moore in Alabama. I believe it was in a special election in 2017. Let's see. 2017 special election for the United States Senate. And if I'm not mistaken, that was because Jeff Sessions was named Attorney General. Yes. Okay. So Jeff Sessions named Attorney General. Roy Moore ran against Doug Jones. And I don't know if you all remember 7 years ago, but Roy Moore was a bad candidate. Rio had a lot of skeletons in his closet, not dissimilar to what we saw from Matt Gaetz. I mean, this guy had a long history of pedophilia and accusations against him, credible accusations against him. He was a real big piece of shit, and he lost that race, and so that was a special election. I don't think anybody presumed that by vacating Jeff Sessions' Alabama Senate seat that seat would be flipped to the Democrats, but it was, and we had Doug Jones for a few years in that seat, and Doug Jones was an amazing senator, and so you never know what can happen in these races, especially since Republicans seem to have seem to have a proclivity to keep running pedophiles for some reason, even though they will continue beating their chests about how Democrats are groomers and how Democrats are organizing, you know, trafficking rings in the basements of pizza places that don't have basements. In any case, we have seen a lot of Republicans over the years, from Dennis Hastert to Roy Moore to possibly now Matt Gaetz, who continue to fall into this trap of basically being the exact same thing that they are accusing Democrats of being. All right, you can throw some questions in the chat if you'd like to. For people just joining now, Matt Gaetz, yes, Matt Gaetz is gone. Matt Gaetz did decide not to take his seat in the 119th Congress. We're in the 118th. He obviously resigned from this one to try and deprive the House Ethics Committee of jurisdiction over him so that they wouldn't release the ethics report. He also won't be serving in the 119th, probably because he knows that in 6 weeks, people will still want to see that ethics report if it hasn't yet been released. And if it has been released, that's even less of a reason to serve in Congress, because then there may very well be evidence of sexual misconduct with a minor. Probably not great for workplace morale if you're Matt Gaetz. Will there be a new election for Gaetz' seat? Yes, there will be. There will be a special election that will happen. But that's a very red seat. I do want to caution against folks thinking like this is a big pickup opportunity. Matt Gaetz' seat is very look, think about it. Think about the kind of district that elects Matt Gaetz. Inherently, this is not a very swingy seat, but a Lee Stefanik seat is probably more of a pickup opportunity than not. Why would Trump appoint a Department of Education head if he plans to eliminate the Department of Education? Probably because that's somebody who is willing to go along with his plans to starve the agency of any funding or to help him dismantle it from the inside. A lot of the people who Trump has appointed to lead the agencies are people who are hostile to the agencies that they're set to lead. So take, for example, Matt Gaetz himself was literally under investigation by the Department of Justice. You think that he wouldn't use his position to then make changes from the inside so that people like him wouldn't face accountability from that very department moving forward? You have somebody like Lee Zeldin, who is appointed to lead or nominated to lead the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He's got a 14% score by the League of Conservation Voters. So this guy is an opponent of environmental regulations. You've got someone like RFK Jr., who is tapped to lead Health and Human Services, who is an avowed anti-vaxxer and who thinks that vaccines shouldn't exist, that our vaccine schedule shouldn't exist as it stands right now, and that schools that administer vaccines or require the administration of vaccines shouldn't get federal funding. Let me think if there's any others who are openly hostile to the agencies that they were tapped to lead. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but in any case, this is a recurring theme by Republicans, and this isn't just new for the Trump administration. The fact is that Republicans don't want to see a lot of these agencies succeed because they view anything that's not their narrow set of priorities, which are just basically cutting taxes for the wealthy and dismantling regulations that hamper businesses. They view that all as waste, and so they don't want the Department of Education because it doesn't help them. They're not concerned about any of that stuff. And also, more education means a more educated population, and the higher the education, the more likely people are to vote for Democrats. And so they're not looking to bolster education. You look at Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. The Republican Party and its donors are wealthy enough that they don't care about the viability of these earned benefit programs. They're not surviving thanks to Social Security. These are people who don't need it. And the Republicans are not looking out for regular people who rely on Social Security to survive. Republicans are looking out for their donors. That's why all they did with their political capital in Trump's first term was pass a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. That's it. Like, there was no infrastructure package, even though he promised an infrastructure package. There was no jobs boom, even though he promised a jobs boom. There was no middle-class tax cut, even though he promised a middle-class tax cut. So on issue after issue, like, he'll come into office on this wave of populism, but in reality, all he does with his political capital is help himself, people like him, people in his tax bracket, and the donors who funded his campaign. And so when you look at these agencies, like the agency CMS, the agency that oversees Medicare and Medicaid, like, that is not their priority. They want to dismantle it because it doesn't matter to them. When you look at the Department of Education, it doesn't matter to them. That is all money that just can be taken out of the federal government and freed up to try and help the deficit a little bit, because ultimately what they're going to do is just pass a tax cut for millionaires and billionaires, which means that we get less federal revenue, which means we have to save money elsewhere, and they do that by chopping away programs that serve as the social safety net for the vast majority of the American people. And so I presume there will be, to some degree, an effort to cut earned benefits. We'll find out soon, and of course we'll push back against it, but we'll push back against it. But I do presume that we will. We'll see an effort to do exactly that. What do I think the Republican Party will look like after Trump is gone? Back to what it was pre-Trump, or will the Maga movement continue? Absolutely, the Maga movement will continue. There is no hope that like suddenly the Mitt Romney Republican Party will return. Not in a million years. It is not going to happen. There is no incentive structure within today's Republican Party to be moderate, to moderate your positions, or even just to be a person who isn't an attention-seeking, egomaniacal narcissist. Look at Nancy Mace, for example. That woman is more desperate than any other human being on earth to get attention. I think when, she picked a fight with the trans lawmaker, Sarah McBride. I think that she's a lawmaker, yes. And tweeted something like 200 times about this poor woman who has committed the crime of being trans in a Congress filled with transphobic bigots on the right. And so these people, like Nancy Mace isn't afraid of her going into the bathroom, but she'll pretend that she is, because all the incentive structure is there for her to make these claims and get booked on cable news and get a lot of retweets on Twitter and get a lot of clicks on articles and bolster her profile. That's the incentive structure in today's Republican Party. Think about this. Have we seen more Mitt Romneys and Adam Kinzingers, or have we seen more Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts come into the Republican Party as of late? There is only one type of incentive, and it's not for people who are focused on legislating. Even when Madison Cawthorn, who has since gotten kicked out of Congress because because he wanted to tell the secrets about his own party and they couldn't possibly have that, but he didn't even have legislative staff. He had comms staff, because it's not about passing laws. There are no laws that these people want to pass. There is no mandate for them to make the lives of their constituents better. They are there to bolster their brands. They don't serve their constituents serve them. They view their constituents as their audience so that they can perform for them. That's what it's all about. It is about getting headlines. It's about getting famous. That's why Ted Cruz does more podcasting than bill sponsoring. So no, I don't think that this Republican Party is just going to snap back to reality and suddenly become the party it was before. There's no incentive to do that. And in fact, when Trump is gone, if Trump is gone, I think that the next people, are going to largely try to do their best cosplay of Donald Trump and try to outflank him on the right so that they can feel like the next leader of the MAGA movement and gain the most support among his base. No one is going to do that by flanking him to the left. It's just not going to happen. We even saw Ron DeSantis try to go right against Donald Trump himself. So what we will see in the coming years, to be honest, is probably an even more extreme Republican Party. And that sounds crazy to say, that we're going to look back to a moment like this era and it feel quaint. It's like a sad testament to where I think the Republican Party will go. But I do think the Republican Party will go there because there is no indication that this party is moderating in the slightest. No, although, look, this is a good point. None of them have his charisma. I agree. And by the way, for people saying, oh, he's not charismatic, for Republicans, Donald Trump is charismatic. Do I think he is? No. Can I see how he is for other people? Of course I can. And so I do want to flag there. Like I think we just have to accept the reality that for a lot of people in the Republican Party, for most of the people in the Republican Party, Donald Trump, look, he's a showman. He knows how TV works. He knows how to get attention. So I feel like there are some things even begrudgingly we have to accept. They view him as charismatic. But I think they'll do a bad impression of Trump. And what Trump can get away with in his Teflon Don-ness, I think a lot of Republicans are going to have trouble with it. That's not to say that they won't try, because I absolutely think they will. But I think they're going to have trouble trying to match the same degree of extremism while getting away with the things Trump gets away with. But they'll try nonetheless. Will old school Republicans become conservative Democrats to stay in the game? Where will they go? Well, we saw a little bit of that in this past election cycle. So there's a whole contingent of never Trumpers. And basically at this point, they are conservative Democrats. I mean, I do a show on YouTube with Tim Miller, and Tim left the Republican Party, I think in either 2016 or 2020, but he left the Republican Party, and this guy, when he sees Kamala Harris's plan for a $25,000 housing subsidy, recoils at it because, he's a conservative, right? But he wouldn't vote for Trump, and he voted for Kamala Harris and spent, dedicated his life to advocating for her and the Democrats in this election. And so I think that we already know the answer to that question is that these former Republicans kind of, unless they want to do the Nikki Haley thing where they try to have it both ways and can't make up their mind and call out against Trump and then endorse him anyway and then get publicly humiliated by being pre-denied a seat at the table, pre-denied a cabinet position, pre-denied a spot in Trump's administration. And you're going to have people like that who just continue to sacrifice every remaining shred of dignity. But I think that there are a lot more never Trumpers who just recognize that this Republican Party has left them, and so they have no choice but to leave the party and to just join the Democrats to stop this Trump movement. Do I think a strong third party will emerge? I don't. Here's why. The sad reality is that in a system like ours, the first party that tries to fracture itself in hopes that a strong third party will emerge is all they're going to do is cede ground to the other side. So let's say Democrats want to turn into the blue dog Democrats and then the progressive Democrats. Okay, well, now all you have to do is be a Republican in the Republican Party, and you have 50% of the vote versus 25% for progressives and 25% for the blue dog Democrats, and then Republicans win every time. And so is it more important to be part of a group, kind of an outside group, that is more ideologically pure and aligned with your views from the minority, perpetually from the minority, or is it more important to actually be in power, even with a party with whom you share 50% of the views or 60 or 70% of the views and actually have the ability to wield some power? I would say it's the latter. I would say that I would much, much, much rather be in a Democratic Party in power, surrounded by people with whom I share the same ideology 75% of the time, than be with the Democratic Party that is 100% aligned and we're just at the top of this ideologically pure mountain in the minority and we have no power to wield. And I think that has to be a focus of Democrats moving forward, that it can't be about imposing purity tests. It can't be about kicking people out of the party if we are not, if everybody doesn't meet whatever purity tests are being imposed. I would rather have look, no one had more frustration with somebody like Joe Manchin. But the reality is that Joe Manchin is a Democrat from West Virginia. And I would rather have Joe Manchin in the party espousing his views and being as difficult as he was, but agreeing with us 50% of the time and helping us pass the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, and the CHIPS Act, than having Republican Jim Justice in there now, and he's not going to help Democrats with anything. So we have to get better at just having a little bit of tolerance for people who don't share 100% of our views, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be frustrating, and we're going to have the Joe Manchins of the world who are more conservative than the vast majority of Democrats. And for somebody like me, look, in my ideal world, we have the Green New Deal, we have Medicare for all, we have all of it. But I also recognize that nothing happens if we don't have power. And I don't view any of our politicians or our elected officials as my partner or my spouse or my spiritual leader. They are just elected officials, and they are there to get us as close as possible to where we want to go. And I would much rather have somebody in office that I agree with 50% of the time, as frustrating as they may be, than be out of power and have a seat go to somebody who I agree with 0% of the time. So that's just something that we should think about moving forward. There are going to be frustrating people. There are going to be the Jared Goldens, who are far more conservative than every other lawmaker in Congress, in the Democratic caucus. There are going to be the Joe Manchins. There are going to be the Kirsten Sinemas, although she's a little bit different because she campaigned as one thing and then just turned into another. So I think she's a snake, and we could talk about that another time. But when these conservative people exist, I think we have to recognize that so long as they're acting in good faith, look, they are entitled to their beliefs, and sometimes they come from districts that are a lot more conservative than the district I live in, for example, where my lawmaker is Adam Schiff, right? So like it's a little bit different, and I have to, in the same way that in the same way that I want everybody to be tolerant, I have to be tolerant of other people's views who come from districts that are much more conservative than mine. And so just a little bit of how I'm kind of looking at the whole landscape of Democratic politics looking forward. And I'm writing an op-ed about that as well, and that's going to come out in the next day or two. So this is obviously something that I've thought about a lot and that I'm pretty passionate about. So I see you stopped wearing a suit after election night. I'm curious as to why. So I've spoken about this a couple of times, but my goal in all of this and everything I do is to try to figure out a way to be most helpful to our movement. And when I first came on the scene and started making political videos back in 2018, YouTube was not a major destination for political commentary. And most people were just getting their news, from linear TV, from mainstream media. And I thought that the best way to be taken seriously was to dress the part, fake it till you make it, right? Cut to a few years later, got 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube, sat down with the president. So now I in large part got the legitimacy that I was seeking. But now we're in a position where, most people are actually getting their news from YouTube now, and I don't need to take my cues from mainstream media because people's viewing habits have changed, and mainstream media is not the shining example anymore. It's not what everybody's seeking to emulate, and I feel like, in these last few years, I've tried to be as trustworthy and honest as possible, and I've built that trust up with my audience. And so now, cut to, we're in a position where it's clear that the Democrats have largely lost younger generation, young men in particular. And so for those people, in the way that they consume content, it's more about authenticity and relatability than it is by looking like some authority figure. And so what's more relatable to the people who we need to reach out to most? Is it going to be some guy showing up in a glossy suit, or is it going to be a guy wearing a regular t-shirt that looks like them? And so if in this moment I can be more helpful by not cosplaying as a TV anchor, but rather just dressing normally and having a little bit of an easier gateway to be able to talk to people who view me as more relatable now, then so be it. I mean, my goal in all of this is always to be as helpful as I can to the movement more broadly. And so I think that right now is the way that I can do that. And it's a small step, and it probably doesn't matter much, but if it's a step I can take, it's one I'm going to try to do anyway. Can you convince me why building a left-wing media sphere to oppose the rights is a better strategy than aiming to reintegrate? Yes. Okay, so the question is, why is it important to build a left-wing media ecosystem as opposed to just trying to combine everything together? We can't combine everything together because the media ecosystem is already bifurcated. There already exists a strong enough right-wing media ecosystem that there is no incentive structure for Republicans to go on mainstream media or left-wing media. They don't need to. They have built up a big enough ecosystem on their own that they can go only on Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, and reach the people they want to reach. They can go on Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino and Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro and reach the people that they need to reach. They can go on Rumble and reach the people that they need to reach. They can go on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, and all of which have more right-leaning creators than left-leaning creators, and reach the people that they want to reach. The battle to be able to reach these Republicans is largely lost. They have created a sustained media ecosystem where they have no need for mainstream media or left-wing media. Now, with that said, what do we have on the left? We have a mainstream media ecosystem that has proven time and time again that they are not on our team. This is the both sides media. This is the media that has downplayed the threat of Donald Trump for years and years and years. And so knowing that, we can either continue to go on mainstream media, which is just as adversarial to Democrats as it is to Republicans, all the while Republicans have their own media ecosystem, which exists as a propaganda arm of the Republican Party. And so you've got mainstream media, which is pretty hostile to Democrats. You've got right-wing media, which is very hostile to Democrats. And so in that environment, Democrats never get a fair shake. And so the only option here is to build a left-wing ecosystem, which, by the way, is not there to act as simps, act as breathless advocates, like an extension of the Democratic Party for these Democrats. We're not here as DNC advocates, but people who believe in a progressive agenda, who believe in a democratic agenda, who are there to promote the ideals that our elected officials are there to enact. And so we have no answer for what's happening on the right. We have to have people who are actually advocating for us. And so that's the importance of a left-wing media ecosystem that exists unto itself. Again, like, I would love to have a reintegrated media ecosystem where people watch, the main channels and everybody is listening to the same thing and facts are facts again, but that's not the world we live in anymore. That world left us 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It left us when the right started dominating on independent media and the left had no answer for it, and it became less and less appealing for these Republicans to actually feel any need to go on any mainstream media outlet. And so now we're in a position where, of course, they're not going to go on mainstream media, legacy media, because, like, why do you need to? You can go on Megyn Kelly's show and get no pushback. You can go on Steve Bannon's show and get no pushback. You can go on Tucker Carlson's show and get no pushback. And these shows reach a lot of people. More people than any shows on the left do. Again, all of the social media platforms reach a lot more people. Let me show you, for example, what I mean by this. Let's go to media. Here we go. News influencers who explicitly lean right outpace those who publicly identify with the left across social media sites except on TikTok. So on every single social media site except TikTok, the right dominates. They dominate on Facebook, they dominate on Instagram, they dominate on Twitter, they dominate on YouTube. The only one where they don't is TikTok, and they probably will 5 minutes from now. It's only 25% red to 28% blue. I would not be surprised if we see those numbers flip in the coming months. And so that's why, like, this we've ceded so much of this ground to the right. And I put a lot of the blame on Democratic officials because they have spent all of these years not validating any independent creators, any independent media outlets, because they're like, oh, if we want to say something, we have to go. It's only legitimate if we go on mainstream media, if we go on ABC or CBS or CNN, and we can't possibly break news on an indie show. We have to only do that on mainstream media. And so they gave all of this validation. They conferred all of this validation to the mainstream outlets. And meanwhile, when was the last time you saw a Republican break news on CNN? They break news on Daily Wire. They break news with Breitbart. They break news with the Washington Examiner, with the Free Beacon. They go on Dan Bongino's show. Like the thing that I was just showing you a few minutes ago. Oh, I'm frozen again. Hang on. The thing I was just showing you a few minutes ago was Matt Gaetz breaking news with Charlie Kirk, for example. And so that's who they lay hands on. That's who they validate. That's who they legitimize. But the Democrats don't do that, and they have wasted years and years and years failing to legitimize any left-wing or independent media outlets because they've given all of their attention to the same mainstream media who they then turn around and blame for doing both sidesism or not meeting the moment that we're in right now. And so that is the disparity at play, and I do hope with every fiber of my being that Democrats finally start to recognize the importance of building up progressive media. I'm getting a comment, fight fire with fire, left cult of personality. Is it time to go full idiocracy? Is there any other way out with the current landscape? I don't, look, this is the point I made before. I don't think that the answer here is to create a Fox News of the left. I think that in large part, the facts are on our side and the issues are on our side as well. On the issues of healthcare, the vast majority of Americans agree with Democrats. On the issue of raising the minimum wage, the vast majority of Americans agree with Democrats. On the issue of climate change, Americans agree with Democrats. On abortion, Americans agree with Democrats. So we don't have to concoct things like the right does, which is like this trans panic or pretending that Kamala Harris ran an entire presidential campaign predicated on funding gender reassignment surgeries among trans inmates. Like, that is not what we have to do on the left. But we can take offense on the actual issues that matter, on issues that actually impact regular Americans. And so I think that's what we need to do. The fact is, we just don't have a big enough megaphone right now to be able to claw back any of that attention. And I think that needs to be our focus. Again, it's not necessarily the message that's wrong. I think it's the fact that our message, it's not a message problem so much as it's a message distribution problem. We don't have the platforms to be able to reach people. And when Democrats are able to make their case, they're able to do it effectively. But when you've got $215 million going toward this disinformation campaign in the lead up to the election about how Kamala Harris, all she cares about is trans inmates, then of course people are going to believe it. And that's because we have no answer for that on the right. And sure, we had $1 billion to do ads, but like, think about where those ads run and think about where people get them. So if they run on TV, that's a smaller and smaller and smaller faction of people who are actually watching TV. And if they're running on right-wing sites, and right-wing sites far outnumber those on the left, then of course they're going to be more effective at reaching people. So again, this is an instance where the size and scope of our message today. And by the way, part of that is, like, for example, we have right now, if anybody's on Blue Sky, follow me on Blue Sky. That is us trying to build up another media ecosystem and leaving Twitter, which I think is going to be helpful, because that's at this point just a Republican megaphone, right? It's Elon Musk's governmental megaphone. And so I think that if people are able to leave that and go to a place like Blue Sky, then I think it will help Democrats have the ability to have ownership in some platform that isn't completely dominated by the right. Let's do one more question here, and we'll call it for right now. Fox News is viewed from the Nixon point of view, a body created so that if Nixon happened again today, he would get away with it. It might be the only way out at this point. So that's right. Fox was the brainchild of Roger Ailes, who worked with Richard Nixon. Within 20 years of Richard Nixon resigning, well, 22 years, Fox would come about. I think Fox came about in 1996. But it was so that what happened to Richard Nixon wouldn't happen to another Republican. And we've reached the natural conclusion of that right now, where Donald Trump not only wasn't excommunicated from his party, but he was fully embraced by his party, in large part thanks to Fox News, who paid $800 million because they lied on his behalf. Like, this is a network that exists to serve him and his Republican Party. So in terms of the only way out at this point, again, like, I'm not calling for a Fox News of the left, because they don't operate in good faith, and their entire strategy, their entire MO is just predicated on lying on behalf of Republicans. But it does go to show the importance that having a dominant media ecosystem that exists to serve an agenda has. And if our agenda is democratic principles, is making sure that people have a living wage, making sure that people have reproductive freedom, making sure that people have access to health care in this country, making sure that climate change is taken seriously, making sure that gun safety is taken seriously, that there's common sense gun safety laws, like all of those points, I think that if we have an ecosystem that advocates for that, then that is something that Democrats need to be able to compete with Republicans in this media environment. Oh, I might be having audio issues, but maybe not. In any case, okay, we will we will cut it off there. Thank you all for joining. If you are not yet following, please make sure to go ahead and follow so that you can join me for subsequent live streams after this one. I'm gonna get back to my regular content on YouTube right now, so if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe so that you can follow along with that stuff. And I'll talk to everybody later on. Thanks everybody for joining. I appreciate it. And shall we do